everybody, and welcome back to Ljubljana Talks, created here live in Frankfurt at IMEX 2025. And with Gorazd, we have another fantastic guest. I'm really excited to be finally meeting you, Joe Goldblatt. Welcome to Ljubljana Talks.
It's a great pleasure to be with you, gentlemen, today. Thank you for inviting me.
The amount of knowledge, the amount of information you have gathered through the work you've done and the publications you've done. What is your view of the meetings industry today?
The meetings industry today is growing from strength to strength. It's really the age of what I call irresistibility. In other words, that meetings and events are everywhere. Why? Because with the rise of technology, there's this greater human desire to do what the three of us are doing, to sit in the same room, face to face, and to share what's in our heart, to share what's in our mind, our soul. So as technology increases, so does the need to bring us together, almost as though it's a magnetic force pulling us together.
Very nice. Professor, tell us more about your journey, how you started, how you get into our industry, into academia. We would like to know more about your story.
When I was a little boy, in my neighborhood, other children were setting up tables with lemonade and selling. I thought, that's a silly way to make money. Why don't I organize a backyard carnival? And so I charged the children in the neighborhood fees to enter. I charged for popcorn, I charged for hot dogs, and then I charged them to have a stand like you have here at IMEX. I made more money than anyone else in the neighborhood, and I had a lot more fun than just selling lemonade. So I always was interested in bringing people together for a common purpose, to do something good. And then, a few years later, I wrote at the age of 9 my first book. Small little book of memoirs, of stories. And I did that because I thought it's important to organize your thoughts, to remember the past, to forecast the future. And so I think for over 60 years, I've been exploring this phenomenon of bringing people together for a common positive purpose. And then, of course, after starting an events company in my 20s and operating that company for 20 years in Washington, D.C.'s the Watergate office building, where we produced 2 presidential inaugurations, President Bush, President Reagan, as well as the opening of the current president's first casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I decided it was time to sell the business, to spend more time with my teenage sons. Unfortunately, the man I sold the business to defaulted. He didn't have the money to pay us the balance. And I thought, oh no, what do we do next? And I had just written the first textbook in the field of events management that's now been in continuous publication for 35 years in 8 editions. So I wondered, could this become a curriculum? So are you familiar with the television presenter Oprah Winfrey?
Yes.
Well, I had produced an event for her, and I called her and I said, if I was to create this curriculum, would you please endorse it at universities so that they will take me seriously? She said yes. And I began approaching universities. Most were not interested because they didn't have money to do this, and I did not have a master's or a doctorate. But one university, George Washington University in Washington, D.C., said, if you will come here and create the first academic credential in events management, we will pay for your master's and doctoral degree. So I received a full bursary, and 3 years later, I earned my doctorate, and now I've taught at 4 universities, and I've been retired 6 years.
That is wonderful. It's an amazing career. I mean, the amount of stories that just you opened up right now, there's quite a few questions. But I want to ask you, if we look at your past career, it's fascinating. But what is it that excites you in the meetings industry right now?
There are 3 things that make me jump out of the bed with hope in my heart every morning. First is the growth of technology. Some people, quite frankly, are Luddites. They're afraid of AI, of teleconferencing, and so on. I embrace all of this because it's early days for all this technology. Eventually, it'll become natural and normal in our lives. So technology, the growth of it, the efficiency, the reach that we have. A friend of mine who's in the technology field, I asked her, what's been the biggest change in technology? She said, well, for years I tried to sell teleconferencing, video conferencing. No one was interested. And then we had a pandemic. And suddenly, overnight, everybody has embraced, and I'm just waiting for that next disruption that will bring the next technology to the forefront to bring us together. So technology. The second is education and research. We now have hundreds of universities all over the world teaching events management, offering degrees. We have academic journals in this field. So to see how it's growing through research and teaching is really remarkable. And of course, I'm ever hopeful about young people because I believe the young people at IMEX, Ljubljana, throughout the world, are our future in terms of events management. They will find new ways to come together for a common purpose, to bring us together in dialogue, in understanding, and in peace.
What a message. Is it true, Professor, that when we meet, we change the world, as MPI said so many times? That was a slogan of MPI. So when we meet, we change the world. What can you say about it?
Well, the great internationally renowned anthropologist, Dr. Margaret Mead, once said, never, never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the world. It's the only thing that ever has. And this was after studying indigenous tribes all over the world. So we always come together to celebrate our joys, our triumphs, and even our sorrows. And so I believe that this magnetic force will only get stronger as my generation ages. Because as you age, you're left with memories. And that nostalgia and that sense of wanting to reconnect with your past is another reason we come together. Because then we become storytellers. We share stories about past events that we've attended together. At the end of your life, what is it you really remember? How much money you made? The finest car you drove? You remember moments like the three of us are sharing right now at IMEX.
You so wonderfully quoted Margaret Mead. Now, if we look at our industry through a prism of academic research, the meetings industry usually falls under the cover of tourism. We're usually put into tourism. The faculties of tourism have sub-programs dedicated to the meetings industry and so forth. So if we know that tourism is not a scientific activity on its own, it always needs another scientific background. If we would take psychology and sociology as that kind of a backbone that connects tourism from its starts and saying, meetings industry has started when people started to meet. We could go that it's, very deep within us to meet. Like you said before, people will find a way. How about the ethics element in what we do? Where do you see ethics and the importance of ethics?
Well, first of all, beyond psychology, sociology, are other fields. Anthropology, as I mentioned with Dr. Mead, theology, spirituality, right? And let's not forget that new field, technology, right? So all of those historic fields, that canon of literature, underpin this modern profession that's really quite young. Events management is an old craft. but a modern profession. And as far as ethics are concerned, when we created ILEA, the International Live Events Association, one of the first groups, subcommittees that we formed was the committee to create a code of ethics. And when you create a code of ethics, you of course start by looking at pre-existing codes of ethics. So we looked at doctors, lawyers, religious leaders, ministers, to see how we could create a code of ethics that would be even stronger than that.
It's just a sub-question. There is another science behind it,
Yes.
and that's the economy.
Yes.
So if we're talking about, usually we measure the success of events through that prism. It's not the prism of ethics or how open it was. It's usually measured by numbers and the business created.
Yes.
Do you see a conflict there?
No. And you mentioned earlier that typically events management is found within the field of tourism. In fact, in most universities, I know this because my book has been adopted all over the world, it's adopted by hospitality. Okay, that's number one. Because of catering, because of hotels where events occur, etc. Tourism is a smaller segment. And then, of course, more widely in the area of business, marketing, okay, because of sponsorship, that kind of thing. And then, of course, you have sports, because although IMEX is not focused upon sports, sports is a huge industry for live events throughout the world. The biggest events in the world, World Cup, Olympic Games, Super Bowl, all from sport. So, when you measure the value of events, the most important measure is not the economic measure. Because did you know that in the history of the world, all of the economic impact studies that have been used to measure Olympic Games, so on, not one has ever proven empirically that there is a lasting economic benefit to holding a major event, what we call a mega event or a hallmark event in your city. Never one study has proven this. But what we do know is it changes people's attitudes. So I call this the happiness factor, that we have to measure how we change the confidence level of a destination. So a place like Atlanta, Georgia, that during the Olympic Games sadly had a bombing, which distracted people from the overall positive mission of the Olympic Games. But to this day, how do they brand themselves for tourism, for hospitality? Former Olympic city. So the minute you have that brand advantage, you use it for the rest of your life. And that to me is part of what I call the happiness factor, or the confidence factor that cities all need.
One question which comes to my mind is that we have a problem with defining the name of the industry.
Yeah.
What would you say with your all of your experience, what we are actually? Meetings industry, business events, live experience industry. I really want to learn how to. What is your definition? So,
Thank you for asking me that. I'm not precious about this. I'm not, because I think there can be many definitions. But let's go back to the root word event. It comes from the Greek, okay, which is a venire. And a venire means outcome, right? There is no root for meeting, for exhibition that is as strong as a venire, because an outcome is what we hope to achieve here. As a result of IMEX, the exhibitors hope to make so many appointments, to have so much follow-up, confirmed business, etc., right? Those are tangible outcomes. So to me, the definition of a meeting, an exhibition, an incentive program is an outcome. And the outcome has to be measurable, right? And it has to be significant enough that it was worth the investment in the event. So a venire, outcomes, events.
You're quite optimistic about younger generation. I can feel it. But is it true that that some stereotypes which we use, that they're not so open anymore to work in our industry? Is that true, or how we see the younger generation? And let's break all the stereotypes we have about it. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, Boris.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, a friend of mine who runs a hotel said he was advertising for waiters, and he got some phone calls. And he spoke to the young people, and he said to them, what are your expectations in terms of work? Now, this is for waiting in a restaurant. He said the majority of them wanted to work from home. And an even greater number only wanted to work 3 days a week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He asked himself, how do you serve my clients, my guests from home? And how do I run a business that's only open 3 days per week? So there is a greater emphasis upon life-work balance. I think there's a lot more emphasis on life than there is on work. But again, it's early days. These things will eventually find an equilibrium. I never worked a day in my life. First as an event producer, next as a professor, because I enjoyed every moment of my days. Now, did I work hard? You bet. Did I work long? You bet. But it was enjoyable.
It opens a conversation that we had yesterday with actually quite a few people, and that is that our industry, similar to the military, for example, people enjoy it so much, and perhaps it's also not just because of social network and creating of trust and building a social relationship within the business that we do, and we're all willing to go that extra mile, that extra step to deliver that extra quality. It also is quite stressful, and that stress, of course, through adrenaline can become addictive. Now, people sometimes lose their own private identities and identify predominantly only through the work that they do. Now, as you said, you've never worked a day in your life. Do you see perhaps that as a challenge of our industry?
That's an excellent question, because that's the difference between a profession and a vocation. A profession is something someone trains for, is qualified in, etc. But a vocation, Boris, is a calling, right? And when you're called to do things, you have to create boundaries, right? That's why I sold my business, because my sons were becoming teenagers, and I didn't want to be traveling 200 days per year. By becoming a professor, I had a more normal, regular schedule, and I could be home with my wife and my children. So it's different for every individual, and it's also different based upon the time of their lives. For young people, traveling is natural and important to them, right? For older people like me, I want to go one place and stay put, you know? So it's all different, but boundaries are important.
Technically, this business started in the caves, actually, around the fireplace, actually, technically. So, did we lost some of the traditions and things we can use nowadays? What we can learn from the past, actually. So, what would you say about it?
Actually, I think just the opposite. We are reinventing this profession with new rituals, new traditions, new history every day. So we're drawing from the past, and then we're finding new ways to interpret it in the modern, context. An example of that would be the way we meet, right? We used to meet for multiple days. A convention in the 1950s or 60s was a full week, 6 days, right? You arrived on a Sunday or Monday, you stayed the whole week. Then the jet airplane appeared. Now you don't need to be there for 6 days. You can come for 3 days or 4 days. The average convention now in the United States is no more than 3 days, and some are 2.5 days. So as technology develops and as human needs change, the way we celebrate or meet adapts. But I don't think it diminishes. I think it just finds, as all creatures do through adaptation, a new way of finding meaning in our lives.
I don't know if it is true, but I just read that we spent around 6 years on boring events from the childhood on, you know. Why so, and what we can do? This is the red line, you know. We are asking everybody here, you know, how to create not so boring events, in your opinion.
Well, the short answer is you start with the 5 phases of events management that I researched and validated back in the 1990s. First, research. You really ask, do we need this event to begin with? Could IMEX have been conducted online or through a letter or through email? Do we actually need to bring people physically together? Because events are the most high-risk, expensive endeavors in any business enterprise. The second question, or second phase, is design. How can we make this event, if we are going to come together, unique, different, creative, innovative, etc.? So we look at all the history of previous events through research, and we say, how can we take our event to the next level? The third is planning. And then we plan meticulously and precisely every element, knowing that when we go to coordinate the event, when the doors open, the contracts are signed, things are going to change because you're going to be attending and you're going to be attending. And both of you have past lives. And you bring all your past life experience to this event, your expectation, your way of conducting yourself with other people, and so on. And then finally, we evaluate the event. And again, we must do that systematically, both during the event as well as after the event, to ensure that we can continuously improve the event. So, do events have to be boring? Absolutely not. But you must follow a system of research, design, planning, coordination, and evaluation to promote growth. And I call it, you remember during the pandemic, many event companies were forced to do something called pivot. Remember that term? They had to pivot, to change from face-to-face to online, selling different products, etc. I prefer to call it rising. We ask ourselves with every new event, how can the next event rise even higher?
There are so many questions, so many topics I want to ask you. But because we are on a time schedule, I'm just going to go with one. You've so beautifully described the process of event creation and, you know, through basically the lifeline of an event. But there is a topic that our industry comes back to all the time. We know that meetings are a part of our past. They're an elementary part of our DNA in a way. But there's a struggle, a constant struggle about how to create advocacy of the meetings industry towards the politics, towards the decision makers. Where do you see the solution for this?
I'm so glad you asked that. You're speaking today with the son of a politician. My father was a city councilman. You're speaking today with a man who was a former city councilman. In Washington, D.C., I was a member for 2 years of the Community Council of the City of Washington, D.C. I've always believed that if you don't vote, right, you might just get the kind of government you don't deserve. So first you have to vote. Secondly, you have to support a candidate that reflects your values, and you must get out and campaign for them. But third, where possible, you need to stand for office. We need more people with event leadership experience on city councils, in state legislatures, in federal governments. When I was a council member, and people would come before our council asking for permission to host a festival, I was the only person on that council who had the professional knowledge to advocate on their behalf. So that's why I've always encouraged my students to vote, to campaign, and to stand for office, because it's the way you influence the world more positively for the future of live events.
Amazing. So, Professor, we are coming to the end of our discussion today, but usually we have some fire questions for you to learn more about you. But before we start with that, I have a question. Can you define in 3 words what every great event needs to achieve? Just in 3 words.
A venere, outcomes. Professionalism. And legacy.
Yes. Very good. And let's start with the fire questions. The first one is virtual or live events. You can comment that, decide for one option or another.
I don't believe in polar opposites. The answer is hybrid. You must make events as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And therefore, by simply giving 2 polar opposite choices doesn't accomplish that goal. Hybrid is the answer.
I don't know if our viewers can see, but you came in a kilt. So there you go. So the question is, pants or kilt?
May I just say, this morning when I went for breakfast in the hotel, dozens of women asked if they could have their photograph with me. And so the answer is kilts every time.
My last one, beer or wine?
Once again, I'm sorry, but your answers, your questions are too extreme. The answer is champagne.
Oh, wow.
Cheers. Or, because of the country that adopted me and my family, for a long conversation and a positive outcome with friends, whiskey every time.
Beautiful, beautiful. Professor Joe Goldblatt, thank you so much for your time and this incredible conversation. It was a pure pleasure. Thank you.
And the same with you.
Thanks.
Many thanks to you. Cheers.
Cheers. And stay tuned for more Ljubljana Talks coming up soon.